Being a single mom and doing it all by yourself is brutal. Learn the brain and energy tools to get back to your center and overcome your challenges. Welcome to Single Moms Doing It All. This is your host, Muriel Falous. And today's episode falls into the category of inspiration. I know that a lot of my clients struggle with teens who either experiment with drugs or some are maybe falling into addiction, or even if that's not the case for you, there is always a fear, especially here in America, where in so many states, weed is legal, not for teens, but legal for adults. Sometimes people get the wrong message from that and they start experimenting with more and more stuff. It happened in my family that some of my kids experimented, and that was really the main reason why I shifted the direction of my coaching and my podcast. So I know how stressful it can be. It catapulted me in depression. And today I wanted to bring a guest who suffers from addiction and had pushed, like in his own terms, the reset button, because my guest today was in addiction for over 20 years from the age of 14. And I wanted to give moms hope. It until we're still on earth. As long as we're alive, there is hope. And that's what I wanted to really to transmit today as a message by having my guest. So my guest today is James Pendleton, and he, like I mentioned, suffered with addiction for over 20 years. And he also has a podcast that is just started, the Addiction Reset podcast, which I think would be a great resource for moms out there who struggle with kids who are experimenting. Hi, James. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is really my pleasure. And like I said, it gives hope to all of us moms to see that it's never too late, that as long as we're alive, we can change and there is hope.
Absolutely. I love how you put it that way.
And I also wanted to ask you to tell the audience your own story, to know where you came through and what was the turning point for you?
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I became addicted at the age of 14. And my addiction was to, actually I had multiple addictions. I had addiction to pornography, which in my religious upbringing, that was a huge no. That was very shameful to have that addiction. And then as I grew up and was old enough to go into casinos, it turned into a gambling addiction, and two of them at the same time. And so I dealt with that for, like I said, 20 plus years. And again, because of my religious upbringing, it was one of those addictions that was a complete secret. Like, I didn't tell anybody, nobody knew that I had it, so I didn't really have any help. And the majority of those people that I did tell said, don't worry about it, you'll just overcome it at some point. You know, once you get married, everything will be fine, you'll have a reason to stop, those kinds of answers. And well, then my life took that path. I got married, I have 3 wonderful kids, and it didn't stop. Those weren't reasons to stop. I mean, I obviously wanted to stop my addiction, but once an addiction started, it's not a lack of desire. And so basically the turning point for me was, it was about 2.5 years ago, March of 2018. I had just moved across the country, just north of you, actually, to St. George, Utah, and started my own company, and things weren't really going that well financially. And having a gambling addiction and no finances is not a good combination. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
basically the lying just kind of caught up to me, and I had to just tell my wife that this is kind of where we were at. Luckily, I hadn't got to the point where I had mortgaged any of our house or that kind of things that gambling addictions can really get to. But I had got to a place I didn't have any answers. And to me, that was my rock bottom. And that's where I think a lot of people get confused. They compare each other's rock bottoms, and rock bottoms are a lot different
Mhm.
for different people. But yeah, March of 2018 was when things started to change. And really the reset button that I mentioned in kind of what I do now is there has to be a change in someone's life that they're willing to make themselves, and it doesn't necessarily have to be attached to the addiction. But for me, I was ready to change and stop lying. I didn't care what people thought of me anymore, including my wife, including my siblings or my parents. I wanted to change for me. And for me, that had to be that I needed to start being honest, first with myself, but with everybody else. And that was really kind of the reset button for me that kind of changed things on a path. Went into some 12-step programs, which really worked for me. But now that I work with a lot of other addicts, 12-step programs aren't always the answer.
Mm.
And so right now, my goal and passion in life is to try and help others through their addiction and figure out a way to reset their life so they can find the peace that I've really found over the last 2.5 years. I've been able to do it without any relapses, and yeah, my goal in life is to help other people now.
That's very inspiring. And so you said the will itself is not enough. And if that was, there wouldn't be many addicts on earth because it's stronger, it's at the brain level and biochemical level, um, which is where I explain it to moms that the nagging and the shaming and anything we try desperately from a good intention to do will not help. Sometimes it does the opposite. What I would like to know is when you hit your rock bottom, do you remember if there was a moment, a sentence, a word, a sensation, something that was the aha moment, knowing like that, first of all, you were in addiction and that maybe you were powerless and you had to call on something bigger than you to help you in the process?
I will say so. I went to a 12-step program that is put on by my church, and it's very similar to all 12-step programs. There's those 12 steps, and the first step one is to admit that you're powerless over your addiction. The key for me though is I didn't think I was, and I went in luckily at step 6 because it's just a rotating steps. Like you don't start at step 1, you just go to the meeting, and the meeting that I went to was step 6, and it wasn't step 1. And I thought that it was super interesting now that I've looked back, because if I would have gone in on step 1, I don't know that that time I would have accepted the fact that I was powerless over my addiction, because I thought that I could stop, although I had tried for 20 years and hadn't been able to stop. Addicts still believe in themselves that they can continue to do it on their own. But step 6 talks about character weaknesses in the program that I was in more than our addiction. And that, to me, what I just mentioned about the lying, and that's really what I hated about myself the most, was how much I was willing to lie to my own loved ones, not to random strangers, to my wife. And the fact that in that step, it was the focus was how to overcome our character weaknesses, the things that are underlying that cause us to do our addictions, was the thing that kind of the perfect storm, if you will. And it wasn't that step 1 because I wasn't ready to admit that I was powerless. Now, by the time I got to step 1 later on, 6 weeks later, I was humble enough and willing to admit that, which was an integral part. But for me, getting in at the right step, it was something clicked for me.
Wow. Sorry. And that's where there is no randomness and things are somehow orchestrated for you to be matched with the exact answer that you need to hear at the exact moment, customized to you, for you to be able to change and let go of what is not serving. That's really beautiful. Um, I've never, I, I never really realized that some addicts don't think that they're powerless, because all the people that I know who recovered hit rock bottom, and that's when they realized, I have to call on some help because I can't do it by myself. It's not working. So that's another vantage point that you're bringing here, that you didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And looking back at the time, I felt like I had hit rock bottom enough to tell my wife the whole story, right? But when I first had gone into that first meeting, I think that would have turned me off, that idea. And what I've learned with people that I've talked to with addiction since is there's no perfect starting point for them.
Okay.
And there are certain steps that need to be taken to really get over certain aspects of your addiction. There's no question. And there's a reason why the 12 steps are set in that way. But I have found that sometimes the steps have to come in different orders for them to actually work for that particular individual versus it's cookie cutter for everybody.
So what really disturbed you, what made you decide to change, was the fact that you didn't like lying?
Yeah.
That was
I
really,
mean, yeah, I mean, I obviously I don't like a lot of things that my
yeah.
addiction caused, but yeah, if I had to, circle back to one thing that really inside my heart wasn't who I wanted to be. It wasn't necessarily the gambling. It wasn't necessarily the looking at pornography. It was more like me deceiving others so that I could do these addictions that I shouldn't have been doing anyways.
So somehow, hearing what you're saying, let me tell me if I understand it correctly. Knowing what we value, because obviously you value truth and authenticity, could even help you to pinpoint where you could get leverage to work on your addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Because for me, I didn't have a troubled upbringing. I didn't have a lot of problems as far as compared to a lot of other people. But what I will say is that I don't know that I was ever my authentic self, if that makes sense. There
Yeah.
was always, because, at age 14, you don't know who you are yet anyways. And so my addiction had started so early and because I hid it so much and lied about it so much, like I was never authentic about anything. And because I didn't believe that I could share who I really was.
And did you feel when you went at step 6 and you were told about working on our weaknesses, did you feel that, because it could be taken in two ways, it could be taken in, those are only behaviors and weaknesses that I demonstrate, but they are not me? Or did you feel that you were wrong and something was wrong in you and you had to correct it?
Um, I th- I think for so long I was trying to stop the addictions and change the addiction versus trying to stop the things that may be causing the addiction. And a lot of people will work on underlying emotions that cause you to do what, go to whatever addiction it is. And so for me, I don't think I had ever really, obviously I knew I was lying and I knew I was a liar and deceived people, but I don't think I had ever come to terms with the fact that maybe that was the reason, or if I could fix that, or if I could work on that, my addictions may just work themselves out versus always just working straight on the addiction. Because I had never done anything else. I had only tried myself to stop on my own the addictions. I never really worried about the lying. I thought if I stop my addiction, I'll be able to stop lying to people, versus what it really was, if I stop lying, it'll help me stop my addictions.
So you decided to stop lying, and then what was the next stage? Because there is a difference between wanting to stop lying and being able to stop those pulsions that are like generated by biochemicals in your brain. How were you able to intervene on that?
Um, well, so that's a good question. One of the things that I teach people and help them in their process is, I call it finding your supporting cast, because And I've also found that the louder I am now about my recovery, like the more people I tell, the more successful I'm going to be, and the less I am tempted by my addictions. And so I'll tell you a story that happened right after my first meeting. So the next week that I was supposed to go back, so I only went weekly. We had happened to, but I had, after that first meeting, I had decided for myself that I was going to stop lying, right? That I was going to tell people, whoever they were, I didn't care if they knew I had this addiction anymore. And so the next week we were walking around our neighborhood before, about an hour before, and we happened to run into some of our neighbors that we had just been starting to, form a friendship with. And they said, hey, we would love to, why don't we get together for some games tonight? And this was an hour before my second meeting that I ever went to. And because I had made that commitment, that again, it didn't have anything to do with my addiction at that time. I had decided I'm going to stop lying. I told them right off, and my wife, I think about, she stopped breathing. Like, why are you telling people that this is our life, right? And that's another thing to get into about other people in your relationships. But I basically just said, I was like, I can't go play games with you because I'm going to my addiction recovery meeting in the next hour. And the response I got from the husband was, that's amazing. Can I go with you?
Wow.
And at the time I thought it was super cool because I was like, wow, that wasn't the response I was expecting.
Wow.
But now looking back, he is still to this day one of my greatest supporters in my recovery. Now, he had been in recovery for quite some time, longer than I had, but he has become my supporting cast, if you will. And so I say you need four people in your supporting cast. I'm a very religious person, so my Savior Jesus Christ is my number one supporter. A spouse or a very close loved one. Then you need a friend in recovery that is already in recovery, and then a friend that is currently working through addiction as well, which is a little bit counterintuitive to some people. Therapists will say, basically, stay away from those in addiction. I find that it helps me stay grounded in where I am. If I'm only surrounding myself with people that aren't dealing with addictions, I feel like I'm doing better than I really am. But if I surround myself, at least one of the people in my supporting class is still struggling with an addiction as well, it keeps me grounded that I don't want to ever go back to that spot. And it gives us more purpose in helping them along that way as well.
So the one that you pick that is still struggling with it, you still want that person to not be as advanced as you are, right? Or do you want to be on the same level? Because I would be afraid of the influence on each other to bring you to a relapse if you are at the same level. Or does it have anything to do with it?
Recovery as you are, but the more important part is that they're actually committed as well, that they're actually, so when I say someone in recovery, that is somebody that is successful in their recovery. Most people are also in their active addiction are trying to recover. I don't want someone in my supporting cast can't be somebody that is actively in addiction that isn't trying to recover.
That's what I thought.
They definitely have to be down that path, but you also want, so for instance, this man that I just shared that story with, he's way farther in his recovery than I am. He hadn't relapsed in 9 years, I think, at that point. And so he was still in recovery, but he was successful in recovery. But then I have plenty of friends that I met at meetings that were also in recovery or trying to be in recovery, but were relapsing on a regular basis.
Okay. And those, you wouldn't want them in your circles. You can help them, but you don't want to be spending too much time with these people because they can bring you back.
Yeah. And one of the reasons, though, that going to meetings, whether you feel like a meeting is the right path for you, because a lot of people don't think a 12-step meeting is right for them, but it keeps you grounded. And because I don't want to forget the pain that I used to feel. Yeah. And so it's a great way. Yes, so hanging out with them on a daily basis, probably not a smart plan, but hearing their story regularly is a great plan to keep you on your path. Yeah.
Yeah, because the brain wants to stay away from pain. That's the number one preoccupation of the brain is survival and stay away from pain. So when you can still associate addiction with pain, it helps you stay away.
Yeah.
Um, when people come to see you, first of all, how do people come to see you? Do you meet them like in meetings, or how do they know that you exist?
So yeah, the majority of people I just meet through 12-step meetings that I attend, as well as we have a Facebook group that we work with people. And then currently I'm working on an online course to kind of work them through, as well as then they can come to me for individual coaching.
Yeah.
I I try to teach some principles that have worked for me and get less. I don't want to be super attached, and that may seem wrong, but what I've found or I've seen before is if they attach to you, as the second that attachment is gone, then
Yeah.
their addiction comes back. They're basically replacing you with their addiction, and that
Yeah, they are not
becomes
really
difficult.
powerful. They give their power away to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've started. We do a retreat. So one of the things that I teach as well is that you talked about staying away from pain. We teach to do really hard things, like to prove to yourself outside of your addiction that you can do really hard things. And once you've proven that you can do something else that's hard, understanding how hard overcoming addiction is becomes easier, because you're like, well, I can do other hard things. Why can't I do this? Because most people that have hit rock bottom or are ready to change, they question whether they'll ever get over their addiction. They don't have any confidence that they could get over it.
Yeah.
And if we can help them by doing other really hard things. So for instance, we just started our first annual retreat last year in Zion National Park, where we ran 48 miles in 48 hours, where we run just around the trails through the night. So every 4 hours you run 4 more miles. So you wake up at 3 a.m. and run 4 miles, and you go back to sleep for a couple hours, and you wake up and run 4 more miles. And it's amazing to see, because everybody gives that same reaction. Wow, like that's crazy.
Yes.
Why would you do something like that? But it teaches people that, wow, I can do things that people think I can't do. And when all of a sudden your brain starts believing
Yeah.
you can do these really hard things, then it can translate into, well, heck, you can do that for your addiction as well.
And that's funny because I did that with fear. So I did the Walk on Fire with
Okay.
Tony Robbins
Dr.
many,
Robert.
many years ago. And I did other parkours where you had to jump from a platform, same thing, conquering your fear. And it does work because it's like a metaphor for the brain to say, if I can do that, then I can do that. But 48 miles in 48 hours, I'm not sure. It reminds me, I lived in Israel for many years. It reminds me of the training in the army, like you surpass your own limits. I'm not sure I could do it, for example, with my body in the state that it is now. I would collapse. So,
Well, and we make sure that, we want them in. We're not out to hurt people. Same thing with Tony Robbins. He's very particular about how he goes about
yeah,
doing that stuff. But the idea is, and even if we do it at a lesser degree for some people, is that we have to. I don't know how many of your listeners have been in 12-step meetings, but if you go in there, there's not a lot of hope there. There's not a lot of confidence that they are able to do stuff. But if we can reverse that and try and find other aspects of their life that they can have confidence in, it automatically is going to translate into that addiction recovery as well.
and do you work with Neuro Association? Because I know I quit smoking like 21 years ago with tapes, where I worked on my brain daily to associate the cigarette with pain instead of pleasure.
Okay.
And it shifted the wiring in my brain to such a degree that I'm now disgusted by cigarette. I don't even stand people smoking around me. So is that an aspect of your program as well, or?
Yes and no. Because I will be, a lot of people that I work with have sexual addiction, and I don't know that, for whatever reason, I hear that story with
Okay.
cigarettes a lot.
Yeah.
Sexual addiction is a little bit different, because you can
It's not, you can
usually
abstain
engage in some
completely.
of it and not in other of it,
Yeah,
right? So the whole like repealing, like I never
yeah,
want to do that again is usually never the case. But we do engage in brain neuroscientist techniques. I follow, you may have heard of Andrew Huberman.
that's how I connected with you on this group.
Yeah, and so he teaches some things, and what I love about him is he's not selling anything. He's just a
No,
scientist that loves to
yeah,
share.
sharing
And so
information.
I've taken some of his techniques because they've really helped me recently in his breathing techniques of how to calm down, and then also breathing techniques of how to actually focus and train your brain to focus. Um, and then he references, so you probably, if you're familiar with him, he references David Goggins, and he's kind of the I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a Navy SEAL that basically does really crazy hard things to, he calls it callousing his mind. And because basically we believe what we can do, and our brain tells us that we have to stop, and at that point,
Yeah,
according to his own experience, he's only 40% of his capacity of what he can actually accomplish.
yeah,
And so our philosophy is we got to hit the reset button on the addiction, understanding that you had the addiction. We're not pretending like you don't have an addiction, but what we want to do is look forward and get good at other stuff. And in the process of doing that, the addiction becomes less of your life and less of what's important to you, to the point where you now have control over who you are, and the addiction is usually not who you want to be. And so it's not easy, like that, it's never an easy thing, but it's, even though you may still have those impulses that you want to do that, the person that you now are is better than that other person, and you don't want to go back to that.
and um, I use tapping, like emotional freedom technique, to calm the nervous system with my client, and it's with myself. I know that I was in depression in 2017 because of my powerlessness at protecting my kids 24/7, and the danger that was above their head when some of them tried like party drugs and stuff like that that could kill you on the spot.
Right.
I was waking up at night with anxiety attacks, and it was unmanageable, and it spiraled into depression. I bounced back using, so same thing. I know I can do hard stuff. I know I can work with my fear. But what I had to use the most was thought intervention and calming down the nervous system in the moment. Like it's a coping mechanism to be able to cope with what's going on, which would bring me into anxiety, which can become an addiction as well, because I was living with a low grade anxiety for the past, I realized, 14 years since I divorced and I became a single mom. So calming down the nervous system to be able to manage what's going on instead of be on autopilot and go to your usual destructive ways. So that's the same kind of journey that you're doing with your clients.
Yeah, and we believe in the mindfulness and meditation and those sorts of things. But what Dr. Huberman talks about is those are great, and he doesn't tell people not to do them. But what he
Yeah,
does teach is you need a trick or a tactic in the moment, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I find myself practicing it when I'm ready to yell at my kids because I'm just worked up, and like I'll catch myself in the moment, and then I do that. He teaches 2 quick breaths up through your nose and then 1 out through your mouth.
Yeah,
And it actually, he gives the science behind it, and you can go
yeah,
look him up to give the science. But basically, it's a physical thing. It's no longer it physically calms you down,
yeah.
and it's a
So yeah,
super easy thing to do that you can remember in a heated moment or in an anxious moment. Just do this, and automatically you'll calm down.
and that's the breath. I love the breath techniques and exercises to calm down the nervous system. I love tapping too because it works with the amygdala in the brain to calm down the stress. And like you mentioned, I've been meditating for years, but in those moments, it didn't
Yeah,
help.
right.
And you need to have the tools in your arsenal to be able to grab them right away and intervene on what's going on. Do you have people who, so when they come to you, I guess they already accepted that they are addicted?
Yes, a lot of times I say I hesitate to say that a little bit only because spouses a lot of times come to us for them,
Oh,
and so it does take a little bit of time. I don't prefer that actually. Yes, my preference is they've already kind of come to terms, and again, and from my own experience, I knew I was addicted for 20 years, but I wouldn't have told anybody that I was
yeah.
addicted. And so it's really me being through addiction myself. It's pretty easy to get them to point out, yeah, you're right, I do have an addiction, and I'm ready to change.
Yeah, because the spouse thing, I was married to an alcoholic for 10 years and they are not always ready to acknowledge. And you can't do, if it's not the person himself, you can't do anything. You can't help. You can just stop enabling, and that's all you can do, really.
Well, and we have questions to kind of, we always want to help everybody, right? But I'm only willing to work with people that are ready to be helped. I'm willing to give them information if they want to help themselves. And so we ask simple questions like, have you ever ran a marathon? And if the answer is no, well, would you run a marathon? If the answer is automatic, it has nothing to do with their addiction. But if it's like, I would never run a marathon, probably can't work with you then, because that proves to me like you just aren't willing to do maybe what it takes to, even if you believe that you have an addiction, there has to be that level of like, I'm ready to give up some things that I enjoy
Yeah.
to overcome the thing that I need to get rid of, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so we are fairly picky of who we work with for that reason. And it's definitely less about success rate of our program. We're not as
Mhm.
worried about that. We're worried about success rate of that
The
individual.
person.
And
Mhm.
if we don't believe that they're ready, then we'll give them all the resources we can, but we probably won't work with them individually.
And if it's a mom with a kid who she sees is going into addiction, is there something she can do to prevent it from becoming a real addiction, or i- is there nothing we can do?
Um, I was thinking about that. I had imagined you would ask me that question.
Yeah, because
Uh,
I have moms like that, and I
yeah,
always work on them. And every relationship is an interaction, so it has an impact. But I'm not sure that we can take a kid with it.
yeah. So what I was going to say is there's definitely things that you can do to help, but there's no way that what you do can stop
Yeah,
addiction, right? And that's just something that has to. The same thing with a spouse or with anybody that is trying to stop an addiction.
yeah,
Now there are things that can be done. So just a brief story. So my dad asked me at the age of 14 if I looked at pornography, because it's a big thing in our religious upbringing. Like that was a question to be asked. And at this time, I don't remember if I said yes or no. I don't know if I lied to him or not, but I was. But I don't think I ever had that conversation with my dad ever again. So like in his mind, he was doing his part. Like I asked you, like, and if I said no, he probably believed me. And if I said yes, he didn't follow up on it.
okay,
And I will say, looking back and some of the research that I've been doing currently is one thing that a parent could do. My wife, her mom was a single mom. She never knew her dad. And one, you can be, and my wife grew up in inner city Dallas and had every reason to do all the bad things that teenagers could get into. And she didn't really get into that. And one thing that she mentioned is that my mom, who has now passed away, her mom was her biggest fan, always. And I think that that's easily stated. I think it's harder to do, though. I think that it's hard for a parent to always, because we want to be the first one to kind of correct and give them, no, you should be doing it this way, instead of encouraging them and being their biggest fan. And the way that you can do that is help them find something productive versus telling them stop doing something unproductive. So instead of always getting on them and nagging them about not doing something, get help them find something that they want to do and just encourage the crap out of them to do that.
yeah, because what I found is that nagging won't work. If anything, sometimes it makes it worse because they want to numb even more. and it destroys the relationship. And the relationship is not only about the fact that they smoke weed or whatever they're doing. There are so many other blessings in that relationship, and when you emphasize the other blessings and maybe you try to introduce some excitement about other stuff, it can help a lot.
And
Yeah.
not just on a superficial level, like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm glad that you like that, but be involved in that
Yeah.
pursuit. And the
Yes.
other thing that I would say that I think teenagers get turned off from, especially that are into something they know they shouldn't be, or they're experimenting, is parents, and I speak for myself, we believe that we have all the answers,
Yeah.
and kids automatically believe you don't have any of the answers. And
Yes.
so the place to meet is pretty simple. It's actually, as a parent, to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers, but that you want to find out with your child. Like, make it a pursuit together. So if the question ever comes up that you don't have the answer to, first off, admit that you don't have the answer to it,
Yeah.
and but then be willing to support them in that quest to find that answer, and actually try, like, actually do it, right? Like, and that's one thing that I know, that if I look back, I would have loved for my dad to actually want to further that discussion and answer all those questions, and he probably didn't have the answers, but like, how do we figure this out together? But that just wasn't the case. I think if we don't have the answers, especially in the addiction, if you haven't dealt with addiction yourself, you're not going to have a
No.
feeling that you can help, right? But
No.
you can definitely help in a way of like, hey, let's do this together. I don't have the answers, but I want to help you get the answers. I
Yeah.
think that would do more from a parent-child relationship than a lot of other things that we could do.
It's more authentic too,
Yeah,
because they know they can smell the lies or the pretending, and they,
absolutely.
yeah. Do you have do you work with teens? Do you work with kids? And
Um, we don't as much right now, but we've got a lot of requests too from parents, and one of the reasons that we haven't is very similar to what I said with our spouses, is just because a parent wants it doesn't mean the teen
yeah.
wants it. And as bad as it is, like, if my opinion is, if someone is in addiction but doesn't believe that they're at rock bottom, it's very difficult for them to overcome. They may for a period of time, but usually they'll go back to that. Now, what I also am very cautious in saying, though, is like, everybody's rock bottom is different. And people, especially people that haven't been in addiction, like to place what rock bottom is for people. And it's a huge turnoff to somebody that's in an addiction to be told what that rock bottom is by somebody that isn't in that addiction. And so I have a specific example of a friend of mine who's a therapist that deals with addictions. And he told me that he told me once, I never had an addiction. And I was like, well, you didn't live with me for 20 years with my
Yeah.
addiction. And so placing a label on that addiction is really one of the worst things that you can do as a support system. But offering help, but again, giving them a reason to, versus my first way of helping somebody is giving them a reason to be good at something else, versus the reason that you're coming to me is to get rid of your addiction. That's great, but your focus is so much on that addiction
Yeah.
that it's an endless cycle. If you're always thinking about the addiction, even if it's in a positive light that I'm getting over it, it's an uphill battle. But if I can almost stop thinking about that and prove to myself that I can do something great, so that would be the way that we would accept a teenager that would be recommended from a parent, would be if the parent wasn't bringing us to overcome their addiction, but they were bringing them to us to go on one of our retreats to do a crazy physical feat, right? Just because they thought it was a cool thing. That would be more enticing to me than a parent coming and saying, hey, I need you to help my son overcome whatever addiction it is, versus, hey, he wants to go on this feat with you, would you accept him? We would probably do it in that way.
Because I of course none of my kids is in addiction, but like I said, they experimented some stuff, and I noticed that the way for me to help them do it less is by feeding a passion or feeding something, and especially like my son loves to skateboard, so he loves to build boards, so to involve him in that and drive him to the skate park and having meet other skaters like some of his friends, all of this, where we are not focused on you won't smoke weed or you won't do stuff, or we're focused on something else. And
Absolutely.
it's much more helpful than anything else, because all the young people that I talk to here in Vegas, weed is legal. They
Right.
know they're not supposed to smoke because they're too young, but they still internalize the message that it's harmless. So they're like, if it's harmless for older people, why isn't it harmless for us? And we should use it for depression, and it's better than alcohol. They have all this argumentation that it should be okay to smoke. And for me to try to have them listen to my message, they are not listening. They don't believe me.
Right.
They think I'm misinformed and I'm just too old. I don't get it. So focusing on something else, like, there is that saying that what you focus on is growing. You bring energy to the focus that you're choosing. It's, for me, it was the solution, but
Yeah.
I was interested. It's very interesting that your approach is very similar to that.
Yeah.
So my audience is, the spirituality is a big part of my coaching, and no matter how you believe or what you believe in, there is power in being connected to what we call God or the universe, whatever your belief is. What part did it play in you recovering?
As I mentioned, I grew up in a very religious home, and I'm still very religious. You could probably actually see my picture of
Yeah.
Jesus Christ behind. And so I tell people that 90% of my recovery was because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, that's not downplaying the 10% that I had to do myself,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was everything to my recovery, and it still is. Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that it's gone. That there's lots of ways of looking at. A lot of people that help recovering addicts believe that it's a wrong thing to continue to refer yourself as an addict when you're not
Okay.
in active addiction anymore. I believe it gives me kind of power of who I was and not who I am now. But I believe, like I said, 90% of that is from my higher power.
Yeah, because to me, I know I used my relationship with God to get out of my addiction, my, what am I saying? Scratch that. my depression,
Mm.
because sometimes you cannot find your own answers, and you can just ask, and you're being helped, guided, presented with whatever you need to be presented. But what I noticed also with women that I work with is there is that fear of being judged because you did wrong. And sometimes it stops them, and they're afraid to even interact with God or pray because they don't feel deserving. So I was wondering if that was ever part of your journey, if you had to overcome that.
100%. Um, Shame is a big reason why people stay in their addiction, because if they tell people, they're shamed from it. My belief is that whether I'm a bad person or whether I'm a good person, my God loves me the same either way.
Okay.
And I believe he loves everybody that way.
Yeah.
And so the belief that somehow if I've made a bad decision in my life, that somehow God won't answer my prayer or won't talk to me because I'm not good enough. You don't have to look too far to find that everybody would be in that situation, which would, obviously God doesn't work that way, because he does answer people's prayers, and he is involved in their lives. And we all have something that is causing us to, if you use that line of thinking, to pull us away from God. But God doesn't, he's not a respecter of persons. He believes that you're his child, and he will always be there no matter what you do. He's the only one that actually can love us unconditionally. We like to use that term as humans, but it's not possible.
No.
But it is possible for God. And that's the most beautiful thing, I feel like, in meetings that I go to. Once somebody comes to that realization, whether it's an addiction or whether it's just normal life, once you come to that realization that God's going to love you no matter what decision you made today, I mean, it changes your relationship with him and allows you to take that one hurdle out of the way, because we place those hurdles in our way and almost blame it on God. It's his fault that I'm shameful, I can't talk to you. And in reality, he's giving us every opportunity to let him help us.
Yeah, because it's just our own interpretation as humans, because we're more limited.
Absolutely.
Do you have a mantra or something that you repeat to yourself regularly to help you stay out of your addiction? Or
I wouldn't say it's a saying. It's not necessarily a mantra or a saying. It is a way of living. So my way of living is I do really hard things. So I had never ran anything more than a couple miles. I played sports, but I'd never done anything crazy. And so now I run marathons, I run ultra marathons, I run every single morning, no matter if I want to or not. So my way of staying clean is to say yes to really hard things. And it seems to be working for me.
It's beautiful, because to me, I don't know, when you were saying that, the image that came to me was like, it's almost like a prayer, like a daily prayer, the running. So there is a question I ask all my guests, and it's about self-love, because there may be so many definitions based on who you're asking. What's self-love for you?
I would say self-love is doing something for yourself that makes you a better person. Because if we can give ourselves that, and we can make ourselves better, we give ourselves permission to whatever it is, the time, especially single moms. I mean, there's no time in the day, right? Yeah. And if it's always this competition of trading time for something that you want to do, but self-love is allocating that time for yourself and sticking to it. Because if you don't give yourself that time, how much are you truly loving yourself?
Yeah, and it will be taken by other stuff anyway. So
yeah, 100%.
Well, I want to thank you for being here today and for doing what you're doing, because it's such a hard, difficult mission, because the success is never guaranteed, and you're dealing with human beings, so everyone is different, and it's a lot of courage, and it's inspiring.
Well, thank you. It's really fun. It's really fun to see the change in people, and it's worth the risk of maybe not seeing that change in others.
Yeah, but I guess you have to be able to detach yourself also from the whatever will happen, because it's like raising a kid. You have power and powerlessness, so you need to recognize where you can do something and where only God can, so relinquish that to God.
100%.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And for our listeners and viewers, if you know someone who's struggling with addiction, or if you have someone in your family, contact James. I forgot to ask, how do people can get in contact with you?
You can contact us through our Facebook group, the Addiction Reset Facebook group. You can get on our new podcast, the Addiction Reset podcast, or check out our website, theaddictionreset.com.
Okay, and I'll put that in the notes as well. So until I see you again, have a wonderful week and manage your life. Do whatever you have to do for yourself. Bye for now. Being a single mom can be challenging, but you don't have to face it alone. Join our community at facebook.com/groups/single and doing it all.
and receive tools, tips, and free group coaching. And if you like this podcast, please review and rate us on iTunes. I would really appreciate it.